Evening all, welcome back to the Car UK channel. Just thought I'd do a very quick video talking to you about the news this week, real bad news from the motor sector, particularly when it comes to the major manufacturers. There is a serious problem afoot here in the UK and Europe with car makers effectively struggling, and there's a good few reasons for that, and I want to give you my views on that, and of course I want to hear your views as well. On the back of the news that basically so far this week we've had companies like Vauxhall, owned by Stellantis Group, come out and say that they are moving or ceasing production of vans in Luton, somewhere that has been producing vans for decades. It's a major blow to the industry, major blow to the area as well of Luton and all the supply chain. And one of the major reasons for that is because of the electric vehicle mandate and the looming targets which these manufacturers have to meet in order to make sure they're not slapped with £15,000 fine for every vehicle they sell which is not compliant, particularly if they get towards 2030. They're already spending hundreds of millions of pounds, manufacturers in Europe, trying to push and advertise obviously the new AVs around Europe and UK with very little success, we'd have to say. The industry is really struggling, and we've just had another report as well in the last few days, a leaked conversation come out from two senior officials at Nissan who have basically said that if they do not get some forward investment into Nissan in the next 12 months, they are likely to go under. A major manufacturer around the world of cars, Nissan effectively on the brink. So what is all this doom and gloom in the car manufacturing sector in Europe? Well, I have a few theories on this and I'd love to hear your response to this. The major one seems to be is definitely the EV mandate. Governments across Europe are effectively pushing manufacturers to get electric vehicles out. They are pretty much all wanting EVs out in force by 2035. Every country is different. The UK is 2030, then it's 35, and it's talking about 30 again. It can't seem to make his mind up. They've been trying the hardest for the last few years, manufacturers trying to get on board with this, trying to push EVs, development, tech, etc., and spending humongous amounts of money doing this. And that is effectively pushing the price up of used cars as a whole, including combustion engines, because they're having to spend so much money in this transfer over to EVs, which in reality is probably coming far too quickly for what they would like it to be, and it's effectively really killing the industry. Let's be honest. No one's certainly doing well in Europe selling EV vehicles and going, this is brilliant. The market just simply doesn't want these cars. It's not got the take up it needs. I'm not saying for 1 minute that these vehicles aren't wanted as a whole. Of course they are. Roughly around 20 to 25% of new cars being sold at the moment are electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, but that's a long way off the 80% that most manufacturers need to get to by 2030, certainly in the UK, before they're slapped with this ridiculous £15,000 tariff on a vehicle, which effectively just kill their businesses. Coming from a position of about 7 or 8% a few years ago, but around COVID time, to 20% is growth, yes, but we've still got about 4 or 5 years to get to. And in reality, if you've only climbed over 10 or 15% over that period of all that investment going in, I just cannot see an 80% target being realistic. This is killing the motor industry, absolutely killing it. And bear in mind, the people who are going to suffer are consumers, because the reality will be that the choice will be far and few between. Prices are already going up of vehicles. There's no competitiveness in the market. And then when you add on the fact as well that we have a new player, China, coming in with lots of cheap vehicles. Yes, they've got very cheap labour, lots of resources, which is brilliant for them. But also bear in mind, they are heavily subsidised by a government, a communist government in China, who's, is pouring money into these industries. Effectively, what is happening is that they are able to dump vehicles into Europe, into the UK, be able to sell them extremely cheap because of subsidies, and be able to flood the market with very cheap cars. Now we go, well, that's great news, what we complain about. Yes, it is great to have lots of cheap cars around. We all want to have cheap, decent cars. But do you really want that to happen on the back of destroying your own homebred talent, your own European manufacturers and makes and models? I don't certainly want to see manufacturers all go to the wall. Brands that have been around for 100 years plus in some cases. Now, fair enough, they do have to innovate, but they are being really beaten here by an EV mandate, which is killing them. And like I said, competition, which they just cannot compete with at that cheap sector. It's okay a few years ago when the cost of a Chinese car and the quality was quite inferior. Look, spending a bit more on a brand you knew in Europe was a bit of a no-brainer. But now the gap, because obviously it's now not a level playing field, is widening of these cars become more and more expensive in Europe. Because of restraints they're being put under, that gap widens. All of a sudden these cheaper Chinese cars, which are slowly getting better, do look more desirable. So I suppose really it's a question of, do you want lots of cheap stuff from China coming in to replace what we've been known and become accustomed to, or do we try and level the playing field back again to make things a bit more competitive? So I really would like to know your thoughts on that. Do you think it's right that manufacturers in Europe should basically be pushed out, go to the wall, be basically effectively brought down by cheap imports in China? Are you for that? Or, do you care about these other manufacturers around Europe? Or do you think that they've not innovated, they've fallen behind with the times, sort of a natural selection, at the end of the day, they fall, so be it? Is price the key, or does quality come into it? Now, maybe the answer is to bring in tariffs. The European Union has just voted in tariffs, although Germany was a little bit reluctant, but now has got on board with it, mainly because it exports quite a lot of its posh cars to China. But obviously, it doesn't want lots of cheap imports coming into its own market either. Is that the answer? Now, it could sprout a trade war. A trade war is probably coming anyway. With Mr. Trump in power, he's going to be certainly hitting countries like China anyhow. So is the European Union doing the right thing, getting on board now and trying to restrict these cars coming in to Europe? Or do you take the argument there, well, why should I, Europe and UK, be penalised for wanting to buy these cheaper cars? Why should I be forced to buy these more expensive vehicles? Why should I be paying more for these Chinese vehicles who are going to have tariffs put in place on them? Governments would argue that they're trying to level the playing field. I'd agree to an extent. Just remember, these cars are being heavily subsidised. I think maybe we might have to look at tariffs. That's my view. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But the main problem, I think, to be honest with you, we need to get sorted. And in fairness to the new government, they are going to have a look at the EV mandate again. They've just announced that this week. They desperately need to radically change it. I suspect, and it's only a suspicion, we'll wait to see what happens, that they will just tinker with it and it'll be something really unmeaningful. It'll be just sort of a political exercise to say, look at what we're doing for industry. We'll start messing about with the figures, like saying, for instance, instead of having to get to 80% of all vehicles sold in 2030 must be electric, that it's going to they'll reduce it slightly, so it might be 60% or 70%. I don't even think even at 60 or 70% manufacturers will be able to achieve that in this short space of time, mainly because, like I said, there's just not the desire there for these vehicles. In an ideal world, we're probably looking at maybe scrapping them, or certainly looking to extend them into sort of 2035, 2040, making it more realistic. There are massive attempts, massive investment going in to looking at combustion engines that are synthetic fuel based, clean burn engines, which are doable. These things are happening. These things are being created. If you can get combustion engines cleaner, and look, they don't have to be zero emissions. If you get them half or a third of what emissions are today on a clean burn engine or near clean burn engine, then all of a sudden the EV argument starts to fall down. Now, as a rule of thumb, an electric car in Europe is about 50% more cleaner overall, its lifespan carbon it produces, than a combustion engine. Most of the pollution that is caused by electric vehicles is in its production, and obviously throughout its life it doesn't produce hardly anything. But whereas combustion engine is a lot more efficient to make, as in the carbon it produces, over its lifespan it's obviously kicking out lots of carbon monoxide and obviously the other gases as well, and that's where it catches up and surpasses EVs. Now, in some countries that is actually a lot less than that. It's about 25% in Poland. So it's hardly any difference between running a petrol engine and running an EV in those countries. But the rule of thumb, 50% is where it's at. But if you get combustion engines a lot cleaner, those numbers start to contract. And if you get to the point where the argument for combustion engines is, look, yes, they are pretty similar to EVs in the carbon they produce. Why are we now pushing EVs and burdening ourselves with massive infrastructure we can't really afford, isn't really practical, and basically making manufacturers go to the wall? It's a stupid idea. We should be trying to maybe look to invest in alternative fuels, or more realistically looking at the combustion engines we've got and how to make them more effective, less emissions. That's what we should be doing. I am not saying that EVs are not needed. They are needed, but they are a small part of the bigger picture overall. We cannot keep going down this path of self-destruction of the motor industry. Government needs to wake up. I hope it does. I hope it makes a radical change. I'm sceptical, but I hope it does make a radical change and stop our manufacturers basically going to the wall. I mean, we've already had our UK manufacturing car industry decimated over the last few decades anyway. We certainly don't need the rest of Europe's manufacturing base being decimated, and jobs as well. Look, just because we might not have many UK car makers anymore, there's still massive production of cars in the UK, and I don't want to see any jobs lost anywhere, but it has to be on a fair playing field. At the moment, we just don't have that. With EV in China, it's just not fair. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on this video. Do you agree that we have a problem with the EV mandates and it needs a radical change? And do you agree that China is causing a huge problem for manufacturers in Europe? And what should we be doing about it? I want to know your thoughts in the comments section. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you like this sort of content, you might want to check out my channel, the Car UK channel, where I do a lot of vlogging of my day-to-days going on in the motor trade, going to auctions, running a car pitch, just talking about the motor industry and the sector in general. So make sure you please like and subscribe. Appreciate it immensely. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.